Hello, and welcome to another edition of Sri's Sunday New York Times Read Along. Our guest today is Kim Todd. Her most recent book is Sensational: The Hidden History of America's Great Girl Stunt Reporters. It highlights female undercover journalists who expose the rot at the heart of the Gilded Age. Our host, of course, is Sri Srinivasan, the Marshall Loeb Professor at the Stony Brook School of Journalism and co-founder of Digimentors, a digital and virtual events consultancy. We are live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. We're also live on our Digimentors website and Kim's Facebook and Twitter accounts. My name is Neil Parekh. I'm the executive producer and guest host of Sri's Sunday New York Times Read Along. We are thrilled to have you join us today. What we wanted to do before we get started is to walk you through a little bit of a preview of what we'll be seeing in the show. We have a great Twitter thread that I put out over yesterday. This is, of course, we're going to focus on Kim's book, Sensational. And we're also going to talk about the book, various aspects. There's a great video by Jezebel that covers the book and gives you a quick 4-minute overview if you link through it. And while we're doing that, I know that Paula will be sharing links, link to the thread, but also as we go through the show, link to these specific pieces. Here's more information. This is a thread that Kim did for Women's History Month last year, highlighting undercover reporters. And then yesterday, there was an installation, excuse me, on Roosevelt Island in honor of Nellie Bly, the real, one of the most famous girl stunt reporters in her book. There's also the link to the Smithsonian magazine article that started everything off. This is where the book really came from. So you'll want to check that out. There are other books that Kim has written. She writes on science and history and nature. Her other books are Sparrow, Chrysalis, and Tinkering with Eden, a natural history of exotic species in America. Her other writing is also on her website. You can see a whole range of different articles that she's written there. And then when we look at the newspaper, there's so much in this week's paper. It's incredible. There's Puzzle Mania, which includes the Super Mega Puzzle. This is a print-only edition, so you'll want to check that out. There are also a number of best of features in this week's paper. You also have the great performers in the New York Times Magazine, and it's online. It's absolutely gorgeous. So check that out. Book Review has the 10 best books of 2021. And then we'll also give you a heads up on She's on Call, the medical show that takes place at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. We want to thank our sponsors. We'll get to that in a moment. We have our YouTube playlist, our team, a little bit about Digimentors, but I wanted to make sure that you know that Sri will be joining us. He just flew in last night, stopping off in London back from Oslo. He'll be talking about the Nobel Peace Prize ceremony that he went to. So we're looking forward to that as well. As I mentioned, we want to thank our sponsor, Muckrack. So thank you so much for all of your support. We also want to thank our great production team. Of course, Sri is the host. I'm the executive producer, but we have Paula Kiger, Steve Taylor, Julia Weeks, and Carla Baranakis. And of course, it's all produced by Digimentors, the social and digital consulting firm that Sri started, that I joined as the VP of Events and Communications last August. We are so thrilled to have you join us. If you're interested in having us produce a show for you, please get in touch. You can reach Sri at digimentors.group. You can also reach me at Neil at digimentors.group. And with that, I want to bring on Sri Srinivasan. Sri, good to see you.
Good morning. I am jet lagged, but delighted to be here. This was one of the many reasons I needed to come back last night so that I could be on the read along. and to be with all of you. Neil, you've done an amazing job as always producing these shows and also guest hosting, as I've been missing in action the last couple of Sundays. And I'll also be missing in action next Sunday, which will be the last show of the year for us. And we're very excited to have our guest next week. Alan Katz is going to be here. Many of you know him because he has been on our other shows. He is an author of 50 plus highly acclaimed books for young readers. And he is one of the funniest people you'll ever meet. And he's a co-author with the Today Show's Dylan Dreyer of Misty the Cloud, an October 2021 New York Times bestseller. He's also the husband of our own Rose Horowitz, who is one of our producers of the COVID show that we do, and just a great friend of this company and our circle. So thank you so much, Alan, for joining us next week. Neil, we've got so much to cover, but I do want to welcome people as they are joining us. Tell us where you are. Tell us what you're doing on this Sunday morning. What are you looking forward to at the end of the year? Patricia says, hi, viewing from New York. It's a grand rising. Jonathan's watching from the East Village. Thank you, Jonathan, for your support of everything we do. We also have Diane Stefani with us, another great friend and supporter, watching from New Jersey. Sudha Parekh, that's Neil's mom. Hi, Auntie. Watching from Tampa. I know she was with you, Neil, for a few days after a long time.
Yeah, she came down for Thanksgiving week. It was great. We hadn't seen her in about 2 years, and in particular, I mean, we loved having her. Emily had a great time with her, and I finally learned how to make potato curry. Nice. It's the dish that I love, and she's been wanting to teach me for years. I finally took the time to learn it.
So some people learn how to make sourdough during the pandemic, and you learn how to make potato curry. I saw photos of this, folks. It looked delicious, and I hope you'll all ask Neil for the recipe later.
Absolutely. Dr. Chandrasekhar is here. Sujana Chandrasekhar. She's sending our love to people devastated by the tornadoes. Absolutely.
So let's talk about that for a second. And thank you, Sujana, for mentioning that. Sujana is the co-host of and co-executive producer of She's on Call, which is coming up at 11 a.m. Eastern. I hope all of you will watch. They're going to talk about cardiac health and millennial wellness. Model Ugunyi and Sherry Allen are the doctors who will be joining them. This is going to be fantastic. Dr. Sujana and Dr. Marina, 11 a.m. Eastern on all socials. Please check out She's on Call. And thank you for mentioning the tornadoes, the devastating videos. We have gotten used to watching tornadoes and the aftermath on video. There's also kind of fetishization of videos of people chasing storms and things like that. But this particular set of tornadoes that hit Kentucky and other parts of the neighboring states were among the most devastating I've ever seen of any kind of destruction, even earthquakes, tsunamis, anything. Please take a look. Please support the charities that are helping out at the moment. I will also make a political point here that critics of federal aid and the government in many other aspects of life, people like Rand Paul and Representative Massey, the guy who you remember last week held those guns with his family on Christmas, they're now asking Joe Biden for aid for Kentucky. Aid must go to Kentucky for the folks devastated by this. But these very same politicians have denied aid and other government help to those affected by other disasters. So this is an example of extreme right-wing conservatism showing us that as long as it affects them, they like government interference and government expression of support. Otherwise, they don't. End of political commentary, but everyone, please support the folks out in Kentucky and other places as much as you can. And we're thinking of everybody affected by it. Please tell us where you're watching from. Please tag a friend. Please hit share. They can watch us live or later. We're on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and on LinkedIn. Miriam's watching from Hell's Kitchen in New York City. Welcome, Miriam. Doug is watching from a rainy Northern California. There he is again, up at 5:30 a.m., local time in Marin County. Doug, thank you for being here. And folks, if you aren't reading his newsletter, you must. It's got the best coverage of COVID, especially with everything that's been happening with the variant. So please find him at douglevy.substack.com. You can find him there. And we're just so happy to have everybody with us here. Stefan's watching from Ramsey, New Jersey. Great part of our Digimentors family. Thank you, Stefan, for watching. And Pradnya, former guest of the show, she's watching from Sensational Silver Spring, so a little civic pride there in the DC area. And speaking of DC, Ted Coltman is with us watching from Washington. Thank you all for being here. And I'm going to be in Washington in early January and look forward to seeing some of you. Dr. Subhash Sharma says, great, thank you. And thank you for being with us. And he's on LinkedIn. And my good friend and former classmate, Nigel, Dr. Vaskuti, is watching from outside London. We couldn't meet in London yesterday when I was there for a very short time. But he's an example of the amazing work that's being done by healthcare workers all over the world, nurses, doctors, surgeons, working to keep us safe while people like Neil and I and others can work from home. They go in every day at the greatest of peril. Thank you, Nigel, for doing all you do. Laura Silverman watching from Pennsylvania, former guest on the show. Naomi Service. Naomi and Janice send greetings and salutations from the Upper West Side. Eve is watching from Charlotte, North Carolina. And Bradley's watching from Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Welcome. And thank you, Bradley, for watching. Bradley, former student. So much to talk about. I do want to take a minute just to tell you, and Debbie is watching from DC as well. Just want to tell you that I had a chance to be, this was a life highlight, hashtag life highlight. I always tell folks, please, when you have something important that happens to you that you want to remember, not for anybody else, use the hashtag life highlight so that you can go back later years and remember the things you want to remember. And I had that opportunity by being at the Nobel Prizes this week in Oslo. I've been to the Nobels in Stockholm, where they do everything except the Peace Prize. The Peace Prize they do in Stockholm, where our friend Maria Ressa, who was a guest on our show, was one of the two winners of the Nobel Prize. And there she is with Dmitry Muratov, the Russian journalist. Some of you know I grew up in Russia, in the old Soviet Union, so I feel a connection to his victory as well, and two journalists winning the prize. And you'll see some of the things. There's a picture of me with Alfred Nobel in the bus that supervises everything. I was one of 12 journalists. Because of COVID, everything had been cut back. New laws in Norway because of the problems there. And so I got to ask a question. It was just really a special time for me, and so grateful. And look at that photograph of the two of them together, the bond and connection between them, obviously Nobel laureates forever now. And just, less than 200 people have won the Nobel Prize in peace. It was very, very interesting. By the way, one of the people who hasn't won the Nobel, there's me asking the question, one of the people who's not won a Nobel Prize is Mahatma Gandhi. And the British put pressure on him, on the committee, not to give him a prize in 1947. And he was killed in 1948. The rule at the Nobels is nobody can win posthumously. So in 1948, as a gesture, they didn't give a peace prize that year. And that was their nod to this. In subsequent years, the Nobel Committee has explained what happened and done a post-mortem. So I credit them for doing that. And there's a great film that you must all see on Frontline called 1,000 Cuts about Maria Ressa in the Philippines, and it was made by Ramona Diaz, who you can see on the screen on the right there, the director. We were at a screening. So it was all an unbelievable couple of days for me. I had to take 5 COVID tests to get to Oslo and England and come here. But it was worth every minute. And I'm so grateful to everybody's support for sharing everything we're doing. There we are. This is a room that normally has 1,000 people, only at 100 people because of the COVID situation. And there's her family. That's like the tennis box. This is the winners. Each winner has a different section. And this was her family, and Maria's family is there. And the king and queen were there. The crown prince was there. It was really a very moving moving event. I will just say one other thing, because it might be confusing. There was actually a third winner there. Last year's winner, the World Food Program, which does incredible work. They were there because they couldn't win this. They couldn't receive their prize. And so let me show you in close up. Maybe we'll just pause the thread there so I can show you. Oh, I know Neil's trying to show the Prime Minister. So 1 second before that, I met 2 Pakistani journalists who live and work in Norway, which was a wonderful connection for me to see them. And if you scroll up, Neil, we can show everybody the Prime Minister of Finland stopped by to chat. He was so relaxed. And he told me he's the one who nominated Maria Ressa for the Nobel Prize.
The Prime Minister of Norway?
Oh, sorry. Yes, Prime Minister of Norway. Yeah.
Just making sure.
Why did I say Finland? Or
you said
something?
Finland. That's all right.
I said Finland, but this Prime Minister of Norway, absolutely. And then let me just show you. Last thing, this is what the Nobel Prize certificate looks like. They give us one in replica. Neil, can you tell us why they have the most prominent date is not yesterday's date or this week's date? Can you guess, Neil?
I'm gonna guess that's either his birthday or when the prize was first established.
Perfect. That is the day he signed his will in November 1895, and that's the most prominent there. So that's the one for Maria Ressa. This is the one for the World Food Program, and I'll show you the one for Dmitry Muratov, which is here. And each one gets a special piece of art, as you can see, and it's all done. Even the calligrapher rightly gets a credit on the back of this. This is calligraphy by Christopher Hans. Can you imagine that being one of your jobs, is to write the Nobel Prize wording? You get that. You get a lot of money. And
I'm assuming these are reprints. You didn't
steal
them from Maria and Dmitry, right? I mean, they have their own.
They got their own, correct. and then everybody gets a Nobel. So Neil, I brought you one as well. This is in chocolate. I don't know how good chocolate Mr. Nobel makes, but he makes a damn good prize. And this is the coin. There's obviously a reverse, but not in the chocolate version. But this is all for you folks, just to have a taste of what's like. And by the way, I just marvel that someone like me, from the circumstances my family came from in India, would have the ability to one day go do this. Is all because of the support of family, friends, and all of you. So thank you so much for making this all possible. I do have one more photograph, Neil. If you go to the end of the thread, you will see I talk about my family for 1 second, and you'll all be amused by the picture that I posted at the after this. You'll go up one more. If you'll just go, you'll see there. I took my family with me everywhere, is what I say, but those are my son's shoes and my daughter's gloves, Krishna and Durga's shoes and gloves that I took with me so they could be on the red carpet with me in Oslo. And you can see it's a snowy red carpet. And by the way, they're complaining it's too warm because it was just 0 degrees. Normally it's at least -5, -10, 15 degrees. They were unhappy that it was so warm at 0 degrees Fahrenheit. And 32 degrees Fahrenheit and 0 degrees Celsius. So thank you all for watching. And we are very excited to bring you the paper and to bring you Kim Todd, who will join us in just a minute. If you're just joining us, we're going to be interviewing Kim Todd, who is the author of the new book, Sensational, The Hidden History of America's Girl Stunt Reporters. We'll explain what that is. Please follow her on Twitter, Arden4EST, ARDEN 4EST. We do this every Sunday, 8:30 a.m. Eastern, and then we'll do one more episode this year, and then we'll take a couple of weeks off, and we have a blockbuster set of guests coming up in January. So please tune in for that. I'm just going to very quickly show you the headlines of the New York Times, and then we'll bring in Kim so she can say hello to us very quickly here, just so you all can see. This is the front page of the Times. You've got the tornado outbreak pummels 6 states right on the cover. The civilian deaths mounted as the secret unit struck ISIS. This is about the U.S. And by the way, the importance of what the Nobels have shown us, we must all call out what's happening and have press freedom everywhere. Toll may pass 100 from Midwest to the south. And then inside Texas, unusual effort to arrest migrants. And I'm sorry the paper isn't as clear today. And many obstacles even as doses flow to Africa. So there, I think it's a little clearer now. Carla says, one of my earliest jobs was in Edwardsville, Illinois, where a tornado just hit the Amazon facility. When I worked there, I covered a tornado that struck just 6 blocks from my apartment. I slept through the actual tornado. Thank you, Carla, for sharing that story. Carla, one of our amazing producers. All right, without further ado, let's bring on a very patient Kim Todd, who has been watching and listening and standing by. We are live on her social feeds as well. So let's bring on Kim and say hello.
Hello.
Thank you for being here, Kim, and thank you for your patience as we had so much to talk about before we got started.
Oh, yeah, no, fascinating day, and I loved hearing about your trip to the Nobels. So
yeah, thank you. I've got to ask you, how are you doing? Where are you? And when I started talking about the cold, did it resonate?
Yeah, so I'm in Minneapolis, and we're digging out from a ton of snow that we got on Friday night. But it actually finally feels like winter here after a very, very warm fall and an early winter. So it's nice. Everyone's got their lights up shining through the snowstorm. So,
and of course, one of the things that what I learned in Norway and in places like Minnesota, you want it to be cold when it's supposed to be cold, and it affects life and expectations. And so it's the rest of us might like it when it's warmer, but those who are true Minnesotans, I believe you were born outside, but you've become one.
Yeah, I mean, Minneapolis, the Twin Cities actually people love to be outside in the winter. That hasn't been always the case in places where I've lived where it's snowy and cold, but they make hockey rinks in all the city parks, and people put on their cross-country skis, and people just accept it as part of life and get out into it. So,
and of course, everything in Norway and Minnesota, there are other connections, including lots of people who migrated from Scandinavia to your part of America. And I was remembering, and I talked to several Norwegians about Trump's offer to have good immigrants like Norwegians come to America, and they were all like, "No thanks. We've got healthcare. We've got great life here."
Yeah.
So let's talk about your book. Tell us about the book, and it has a wonderful title and very intriguing.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. So the book is really about this forgotten decade of female undercover reporting in the late 1880s and the 1890s. And it got started off with Nellie Bly, who in 1887 went undercover into Blackwell's insane asylum for women on what's now Roosevelt Island in New York. And she spent 10 days there. She got herself admitted as a patient and emerged with just scandalizing reports of patients being beaten and being fed rotten food and being put to bed in rooms that were freezing. And basically, like, there was no way for women to get out, because once they were in there was no way for them to prove that they were sane. And she met a lot of women who just seemed perfectly sane to her. They were just poor, or they were immigrants. They didn't speak English, or their husbands wanted to get rid of them. And so she wrote 2 very long pieces for Joseph Pulitzer's The World, and people read them all over the country. And one of the upshots was that editors all over the country suddenly decided, like, wow, I would like to hire a woman to do this kind of reporting because everyone wants to read it. And then a lot of women throughout the country who didn't have a whole lot of job opportunities thought, wow, I would really like to do this kind of reporting. It seems exciting and meaningful. And so it launched this decade of innovative journalism by women. And so that's the topic of the book.
And the title of the Girl Stunt Reporters, by the way, it's very rare to see quote marks in a title, but you had to put that there so that people wouldn't be confused about the name of that. But just tell us that origin and and your own wrestling with it to put it in the title.
Yes, thank you for asking that. I really fought to have the quotation marks in the title. It was really important to me because one of the reasons that we don't know about this decade of reporting is that in the start of the 20th century, the work of these women was very actively dismissed. And so if it had been done by men, we might have talked about it as investigative journalism. But because it was done by women, and often very young women, it was both sort of tagged with being a female genre with the girl, and then as being not serious with the stunt. So I wanted to reference that was, the way that the genre was thought of, but not quite say that I was endorsing the idea of these women investigative reporters being termed girl stunt reporters.
And was there any technical discussion of how do you put quote marks in a title? Had that been done before by your publishers?
No, actually, it was very, I asked and they honored the request. I was afraid that it was going to be more of a back and forth, but I think they understood the reasoning, and I was very pleased to have those quotation marks in there.
Can you talk a little bit about the racial aspect of this? Because as I understand it, Black journalists, especially Black women journalists, were not considered respectable enough to be part of the stunt part of this, in a sense that part of the unusualness of this was that these were women who had status and prestige or privilege of some kind and were doing this work. Can you explain that?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that it's that Black women weren't considered respectable enough. It was just that over time, like, girl stunt reporting became almost like a role, almost like a role that you would play in a play, because these reporters were incorporating a lot of first-person work, and they often described what was happening to them as they went through the reporting. And these were primarily white women, not all necessarily from privileged backgrounds, but writing for white-owned papers. Really, the center of the book is the way that this kind of reporting played into the massive circulation battle between Hearst and Pulitzer in the 1890s. And so it was just a white role. And so that they didn't hire Black women to play this white role. But the book does cover two exemplary Black women reporters. It talks about Ida B. Wells, who I hope most people know now. She did win a posthumous Pulitzer for her work as reporting on lynching and the vast extent of lynching in the South during these years, which were some of the worst years for lynching. And she didn't specifically go undercover, and she didn't write for the white-owned newspapers. Often what she had to say was so inflammatory that, she had to own the paper that she published it in, or some of her books were even self-published, like The Red Record, because she couldn't get any, institution to back her. Another woman who I read about, who I think is really fascinating, another Black woman, is named Victoria Earl Matthews. And she started out doing a lot of the women's page work that the female undercover journalists found very stifling. But then during the 1890s, she went to the South, and there's some indication that she may have passed as white to do some of her reporting in the South. And she came back with this inflammatory report about these employment agencies who were luring Black women to the North with the promise of more freedom, with the promise of good jobs, and then locking them into debt, and they were never able to escape and find the good jobs that they were promised. And essentially, she documented an 1890s version of human trafficking. And it's really important work, though not specifically in the girl stunt reporter mode, as people like Bly.
Can you explain how this book came to be and how it fits into the work that you've already done, science, history, etc.?
Yeah. So how it came to be was that I was reading Nellie Bly's book, 10 Days in a Madhouse, which she published as, a compilation of the work that she had done after her Blackwell's Island reporting. And it struck me that so much of what she was doing was really very much what we hold up now as creative nonfiction, or new journalism, as highlighted by Tom Wolfe. She wrote in scenes. She created a compelling first-person point of view character. She talked a lot about like the status details to really bring her characters to life. She used dialogue, and she just used narrative to really describe the lives of the people that she was writing about. So one, I thought, wow, here's this woman doing an early form of creative nonfiction, and we don't hear about her as one of the progenitors of it. The second thing that I noted was the way that she had created opportunity for all these women who I'd never heard of. I'd heard of Bly, but I hadn't heard of Nell Nelson. I hadn't heard of Winifred Black. I hadn't heard of Eva McDonald. I hadn't heard of Victoria Earl Matthews. I hadn't heard of Elizabeth Jordan. So just all of these women doing really high-level work during that decade. And the final thing that struck me about it was kind of the girl part of the Girl Stunt Reporter, which is that I was really interested in the situation of female writers who specifically write about living in a female body. So one of the things that these women were able to do, which male reporters of the day weren't able to do, was go into situations which were dominated by women and look at, the situation of women in factories, or the situation of women in insane asylums, or the situation of women's treatment in public hospitals. So throughout history, women writers writing about the situation of being in a female body have been very popular and sold lots of copies and made lots of money for their editors and sometimes themselves, but their work has not been respected. So whether that was the stunt reporters of the 19th century or the romance writers and authors of, chick lit today, so there's this sense, I think, which is still ongoing sometimes, that to be taken seriously, women need to write about men, or at least avoid women's topics, which often get put on, we don't so much call it the women's page today, but it still exists in a lot of newspapers. So I was interested to see how these women navigated that particular catch-22, which I think is still ongoing.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. We're still fighting for women's equality in journalism. And even though there are so many women who are doing absolutely unbelievable work, and women leading newsrooms now, including most recently the AP being led by the editor-in-chief is a woman, and the Washington Post, and all these great publications. Folks, we're talking to Kim Todd. Please tell us where you're watching from. Please tell us about your Sunday, and feel free to ask any questions. One of the things that I wanted to ask you before we get to the paper is, what parallels do you see between the work and the era you are covering and the story of the good girl revolution and the fight to get magazines be more equal in the 70s? Have you had a chance to think about that in any way?
Well, I mean, only in that the book does sort of look at how these writers and the issues that they were dealing with, ripple ahead to today. And I think that, the ripples are all there, as you point out. There have been like big waves of pushes over and over to get, more women in the newsroom. I still think that the numbers are unequal. And there's some examples in the book about when even like the most hard-hitting investigative reporting is done by women, sometimes it's not taken as seriously, or sometimes it's kind of put in other category. I have the example of the book of Suki Kim, who went undercover in North Korea and wrote the book Without You, There Is No Us. And it talks a little bit about the reception of that book and how it was really seemed as like much more of a stunt than the work that men have done going undercover as prison guards and that kind of thing, for example.
Thank you. I see Eve Botello says the book sounds fascinating, which of course it is. And we hope everybody will get a chance to check it out online or at their favorite independent bookstore. And Patricia says, who would Kim say was a mentor in writing this last book?
Oh, wow. That's a wonderful question. So many people whose work I'm inspired by. I mean, in terms of writing about history and women's history, I always really appreciate Jill Lepore and the way that she's able to both really wrestle with some of the large questions and bring characters from history to life, like her book about Benjamin Franklin's sister, which was really wonderful. This woman who you'd never heard of, and you completely hear her voice and see her daily life and really understand the world, both its joys and restrictions. So she's someone whose work I really appreciate.
Great. Patricia says, amen. History is essential for learning and growth. Thank you, Kim, for your diligence in serving us with investigative writing of history. And for those who didn't get my reference, Good Girl Revolt is a show that's on streaming platforms and written by my friend Lynn Povich, is about the revolt and revolution at Newsweek magazine in the late 60s, early 70s. And Lynn and I helped co-found the Online News Association, and it was so much fun to work with her. Carla says, Kim, your book is fascinating and incredibly well researched. Do you view yourself as a long-form journalist?
I don't know that I view myself as a journalist. I don't think it's a label that I can claim. I think I'm a writer who follows her interests to all the weird places that it goes. I do love writing books. I have to say, I was a reporter just out of college for 2 years, maybe, for a very small newspaper outside of Seattle. And that was just too short. And sometimes even writing like a longer magazine article is too short. I think that I really need 300 pages sometimes to work through all my thoughts and tangents on a topic. So very, very long form, perhaps.
And this is, and there are some of the books that you've written, the other 3 books, and obviously with the science background. And then here are some of your articles. So everyone check out her website at kimtodd.net. And so many different topics. Kim, I mentioned Ramona Diaz from the Maria Ressa film, 1,000 Cuts, and she also does not call herself a journalist. She says people keep referring to her as a journalist, but she's a storyteller, a documentarian, etc. So I think I see some parallels there. Jonathan says, don't know whether this relates, but Edith Wharton scored a journalist coup by being the first to interview women in a harem, which obviously male reporters would not be able to do.
Wow, I did not know that. I'm definitely going to go right out and look that up after this conversation. So thank you for that. When we were talking about the devastation in Kentucky, I was thinking about Winifred Black, who's one of these reporters who was the first reporter on the scene to report at the Galveston hurricane of 1900. And she dressed as a man and, convinced them that she was going to do repair work in Galveston, and was able to get on the boat and both do reporting. And then she reported for Hearst's papers. And as soon as she got back from her reporting trip, he had her setting up sort of supply lines for donations for the people impacted.
Debbie asks, did any women use initials or neutral non-female bylines?
That's a really good question. I mean, one of the things that was so fascinating to me about these women was that they were unapologetically writing as women. And they were famous enough that a lot of times their names or the pseudonyms that they used, which I think were all indicating female names, were in the headlines. That was, you saw that shift with Nellie Bly, where, at first her name would be down there at the end. And then soon people were so interested, not just reading what she had to say, but reading a story by Nellie Bly, so that became part of the headline, became part of the selling point of the story. So I can't think of any of the reporters that I wrote about. I think they really claimed the idea that they were women telling these women's stories.
Glad to hear that. Miriam says, beautiful covers and all the books sound fascinating. And you should know Miriam shoots pictures of authors, some of the most famous authors of in American in recent years. So she knows good book covers. So that's great to see. And Doug says, I wish I loved writing books the way Kim just described. I'm struggling on my latest, but I can knock out a newspaper-sized article fast and have fun doing it. I'm enjoying seeing Kim's passion for the story she's uncovered. So that's great. And Patricia says, although Kim isn't known as a historian, her style reminds me of Doris Kearns Goodwin. Wow, that's a compliment. Okay, so if it's okay, Kim, we're going to check out the paper, and we'd love for you to comment and participate as much as you're comfortable with. And I'll ask you some questions along the way, and then of course we'll come back to talk about the paper and then wrap up. Our goal is to end at 10 a.m. Eastern, and we are going to start by looking at the paper. And of course, the devastation with the earthquakes is the hurricanes is on the front page. Civilian deaths, a secret unit struck ISIS. U.S. forces are alarmed. U.S. force alarmed officers by sidestepping rules protecting non-combatants. Big story there. Trump's loyalists speed into jobs overseeing vote. And that's, again, so sad that that's the situation we're in now. The president of one of our only two political parties of any consequence is actively undermining voting in America today. Many obstacles, even as doses flow to Africa, which is about the vaccine, and inside Texas's unusual effort to arrest migrants. And you've, of course, looked at a lot of newspaper headlines over the years. What strikes you about the evolution, Kim, of American newspapers?
Well, I mean, it strikes me that while sort of the Pulitzer Hearst era is deemed yellow journalism and kind of thrown in disrepute, and a lot of journalism professionalized at the start of the 20th century, really in opposition to the things that Pulitzer and Hearst's paper were doing, so many of their innovations persist. Some of the critiques of yellow journalism were like, so many photos, I mean, not photos, but so many pictures they used and such large headlines. But those things have really been embraced by papers now, as has the storytelling style, I think, of a lot of these women and other reporters for those papers.
By the way, because I was in London, I was able to just find the New York Times International Edition. And just to remind people, this is the longer, see how much wider the paper is. This is what they used to be like, and that's now that extra column worth of content is now gone from the American edition. So they still have the longer broadsheet than they have here now. Having had to handle this in the plane as I was reading it, it's so much easier at this size. Of course, even easier at tabloid size compared to this. And let's see. Putting their distrust aside to seek justice for Indigenous students, a joint inquiry offers a model for Canada. Important story there. What's going on in France? This is really amazing. This man who was considered so out of the mainstream that there would not be any chance he would have a shot at being president. A seething campaign rally, not unlike Trump's, but this time in France. A polemicist begins bid for presidency, and he has a shot. Jeffrey says, much better for swatting British flies, though, says Jeffrey. With the flip of a switch, Rome gets in the spirit of brooding over a tree. And I guess there's some discussion there about Christmas trees. A floating powder keg for a few hours at least. A ship episode shows Moscow-Kiev tensions. And it's palpable when you're in Europe, the tension between Ukraine and Russia. You know, when we're here in America, Kim, it feels like it's a continent away, because it is a continent away. But when you're in Norway and in England, everybody's hyper aware of that. Can I ask you, how much interest was there in international news in your historical surveys?
Oh, that is a good question. I mean, I would say there was, but it was very focused on England. Like, I think there was a lot of back and forth between England and the US and concerns what was happening between them. But, you know, in terms of like, you know, Norway or Asia, much less. Though there was discussions of China, particularly in Hearst's papers. You know, his big first bid was the San Francisco Examiner, which he made quite a success of, and also was very openly racist against Chinese immigrants. And so there was lots of discussions of China in his papers.
Thank you. My friend Eric's watching from Ottawa. Hi, Eric. Thank you for watching. And since you brought that up, Kim, I will mention to everybody a wonderfully evocative and useful way to understand what happened in in Chinatown and Chinese American immigrants in San Francisco is a show on HBO Max called Warrior. And it's very graphic, very violent, lots of sexual scenes and things like that. But it's based on the writings of Bruce Lee, and it's produced by Bruce Lee's family. And it's absolutely mesmerizing. They have 2 seasons out of it. It's called Warrior. And it captures a lot of that racism that was prevalent in American politics leading up to the Chinese Exclusion Acts at the end of the 1800s. So as someone who likes history, you might like that, Kim.
Thank you.
Cheap homes fuel boom in Bakersfield, the Texas of California. This gives me a chance to ask you about California, and also an unusual connection you have to the New York Times as a result. With the puzzle.
Oh, yes, of course. So I grew up in Berkeley, California, and one of the great joys of the past year has been the ability to see my parents after the complete close down of COVID. One of the things that I spend many hours doing with my parents, my dad in particular, when I go visit, is do the New York Times crossword puzzle. It's always a highlight of our day as we work our way through it and are sort of competitive about who can get there first and knock off some of the easy ones.
Oh, nice. And we'll be talking about the New York Times Puzzle Mania section in just a moment. What's the housing situation in the Twin Cities? Do we see the same boom that's happening in other parts of the country?
Yeah, I mean, certainly real estate prices have gone up. I mean, I don't think it's anywhere near to the high heights of the coasts, but definitely people are feeling the squeeze. And there's definitely the search for how can we develop more housing? How can we, develop more housing at costs that people can afford? I do think that the Twin Cities is very different from an area like San Francisco or Berkeley, though, in that it just has a lot of space to spread in a way that a place like San Francisco doesn't.
I hear you. Here's an unusual story. The rift between senator and son shows challenge in taxing the ultra-rich. And this is about Ron Wyden, the senator, and his son, who's super rich, Adam Wyden. He's fighting the tax hikes that his father is proposing. So that's interesting to see. And let's see. On abortion, public is not as polarized as the parties. And that's because survey after survey shows how generally the approval rates of abortion much higher. Proud Boy gets 10 years for violent acts in Portland. And this brings us to the obituaries. Anything to say about obituaries as you saw them in your research? And did the women you wrote about get obituaries that were worthy of their work?
Oh, that's an excellent point. I mean, I think that Ida B. Wells was one of the first people who the New York Times realized that they needed to do an obituary for, as they did this kind of reevaluation over the past several years of, notable people who had, because of their race or because of their sex, had really not been accorded the benefit of an obituary. So Ida B. Wells was definitely someone who received one more recently in accordance to her stature. But if you think of someone like Winifred Black, who wrote for Hearst's paper, who did that Galveston series, she was completely tied in with the way that people thought of San Francisco. And she had a huge obituary and a huge public funeral, and was very honored at the time of her death. Nellie Bly was somewhere in between. It was mentioned when she died, and several fellow journalists and advocates for her, pointed out the significance of her passing, but not quite the big splash that, at least in my opinion, it should have been.
Neil was showing the Overlooked series that you were referring to, and we had a fabulous conversation with Amy Padnani, Obituaries editor of the New York Times, who had created and conceived of the Overlooked series. So if you folks go back in our archives, you can find that. And again, everything's on YouTube, youtube.com/3net, so you can find us there. And please tag and share this episode, this conversation with Kim. It's so cool that your friends can watch it live or later on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn. There's somebody in your life who would benefit from this conversation, and please share it. And we are obsessed with obits on the show, Kim, as you can maybe tell. And I read them very closely. Here's Dennis O'Brien, 80, dies, partnered with ex-Beatle and made many quirky movies. He was hired to bring some stability to George Harrison's financial affairs. And then Frank Williams, 79, manager of Formula One racing teams, died. And then one of the Monkees died. The band, the Monkees from the 60s, died this week. Or yesterday, maybe. I don't know if he got an obit yet. Darlene Hard, 85, winner of 21 Grand Slam events in the amateur era, dies. A champion who was ranked #1 in the US from 1960 to 1963. And are you a sports fan?
I am, but I really only watch at the highest level. Like, I love World Cup soccer, for example, but I don't follow the teams when they're on their path to the World Cup.
So you have very high standards.
I have very high standards. I only want to watch the best, but both men's and women's, that's my favorite sporting event, is World Cup soccer.
This was, by the way, Neil showing Michael Nesmith's passing was huge news in England when I was there yesterday. It led the news on many shows. And Neil Genslinger, our two-time guest on this show, a New York Times writer, is the writer of this obit. It hasn't made it into the print section yet, or may have been there yesterday, I'm not sure. But I'm glad to see Neil's byline there, and it brings the show all together here. So thank you, Neil, the other Neil, for sharing that. And since we did mention it, I will show very quickly the puzzle section, and a special section packed with puzzles, brain teasers, and confounding contests. That sounds like something they would have written in the 1800s, right? That kind of lively language.
That kind of lively language, and also I think the idea of this interactivity. So both Hearst and Pulitzer were very much into having newspaper contests that people could enter, and always looking for the way to get the readers engaged, and making the newspaper sort of a personal experience.
Let's go back to talking about obits for a second. Doug has corrected me. Mr. Nesmith wasn't just one of the Monkees. He was a very important person in digital media, songwriting, and so much more. Thank you for correcting me, and everyone should go back and read the obit. And want to remind you, Miss You Graham is a fantastic app you can use to honor those who have passed away. It's available on iOS and on Android. Miss You Graham. Miriam says, I doubt it's in the print edition, but writer Anne Rice died at 80. Read it online. She of course wrote The Vampire Diaries and more. And Gothic Tales of Vampires, died at 80. She wrote more than 30 Gothic novels, including the bestseller Interview with the Vampire, which became a hit movie starring Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt, and a lot of white makeup. And so folks, do check that out. And we'll go back. Here's the puzzle section. Puzzle Mania is the name of this section. And look at the number of puzzles here. I won't be doing most of these, but it's good to know this exists. And I think, Kim, you believe the same thing. And the Sunday Business cover is Elon Musk trolling away. Some wealthy people donate money to charity to burnish a reputation, not the Tesla CEO. I going to say about Mr. Musk, who obviously has done a great job with Tesla, while still underplaying at every step of the way the importance of safety with his cars. His own engineers told him that there were problems and he would push back, but otherwise he's done a good job. But he also is now very critical of government deficits, critical of government subsidies for anything, even though Tesla took so much, so many subsidies and ran deficits for years. And so this is an example of Mr. Musk just being a troll in so many ways. And I'm so glad the New York Times has called him out, and the headline says Elon Musk trolling away. The politics of big tech shifts from theater to gridlock. And one of the tweets I read yesterday pointed out that after years of embarrassing and sometimes humiliating testimony in front of Congress by all the tech CEOs, not one law has been passed that affects change in a good way for the tech industry. So there is that theater as we're seeing here. And this is a Cecilia Kang's piece that was tweeted about Congress finally gets Silicon Valley, but now partisanship stalls regulation. What I think they mean by finally get Silicon Valley means finally understands Silicon Valley. Sunday Review, the cover is The Future of Money. Cash is on the way to obsolescence. Is there anything we can trust to replace it? And I don't know if you've had this experience, Kim, but I spent part of a week in Europe and never used cash for anything. I was able to use American credit cards with no foreign transaction fees the entire trip. Have you had a journey like that yet?
Well, I mean, I didn't even have to go anywhere, I think, to have that experience. I think during COVID, we just got so used to either buying things online or just using credit cards because people didn't want to touch money. They were very interested in, how they can minimize hand-to-hand transactions. I think I can count on one hand the number of times that I've paid for something in bills in maybe the past, year and a half.
Oh, thank you. And look at what Naomi found. Another cool Michael Nesmith tidbit. His mom, Betty Nesmith Graham, invented liquid paper that is whiteout. I did not know that, and salute to her. And by the way, Kim, something we used to use a lot growing up and now don't need. And maybe in your manuscripts you use them for some reason. But
I also use this as when I was younger. My kids are both applying for college this year, and I remember my college applications having a lot of whiteout on them, but theirs definitely do not.
Well, I wish you the best with the college application process. It's so hard during the pandemic. I know that from our own experience with our twins who are now freshmen in college. You will all survive it, but
Thank you.
it is a lot of agita for the parents especially. All right, going back to the paper, the Sunday Styles, meet your sweater. Uh-oh, what does that mean? Let's see. Laurel Piana makes some of the world's most luxurious cashmere. Now you can trace every step of its journey from Mongolia to Madison Avenue. So I guess the animals are still, are shorn, but not affected in other ways, I hope. And this is Vanessa Friedman, who covers fashion. This is her story. And Patty Lepone, the bravado softened by vulnerability is Maureen Dowd's piece in here. And let's see what else is in this. We've talked in the past about this, the way in which this paper is. By the way, there's a three-page ad for Ralph Lauren here, and you can see no text on this first page. Was just him, and I don't know enough about fashion to know who this is. Does anybody know? Please jump in. And the Modern Love column, we love reading this. We've had on Valentine's Day Daniel Jones, the editor of Modern Love and the executive producer of the TV series, join us. Find that in our archives last year. It was so much fun to interview him. I would give anything to hold their hands again. A husband and wife find a way to talk about their young sons, to talk to their young sons about an unspeakable event. And let's see. Erica says, Kim Todd, great to see you this morning.
Erica's a great friend.
Oh, good.
You're
Hi,
from
Erica. And is that a typewriter in her image there? I can't quite see it from where on my screen.
I imagine that it would be, yes.
Okay, so one of the things that we do, Kim, is we put our wonderful guests on the spot by reading out the social cues column, the etiquette column, and asking you a question. That, don't worry, there's no right or wrong answer.
Oh no, okay.
Galan says, but we'll just hear your thoughts, okay?
Yep.
Charity for the rich. I know of a family that suffered a terrible tragedy. Their son died, leaving their young grandson parentless. The family lives modestly, but I believe the net worth is substantial. I would guess $50 to $75 million. So I was surprised to learn that the family is apparently soliciting donations or a trust fund for the grandchild. This seems almost offensive to me. Am I wrong? So your thoughts?
I mean, I'm reluctant to judge what people do in the wake of tragedy. I mean, I guess that it would be, up to the writer whether to contribute or not to contribute. But yeah, I think that I would just, write off whatever poor decisions they may be making due to grief, and I certainly wouldn't raise it. But that's my take.
I think that's a good answer, and I'd also say to the family, if you have $50 million, you're probably okay. But here's what Philip Galan says, and again, no right or wrong answer. He says, "What an ugly question. First, you assume a family's great wealth without evidence. On what do you base your guess that their net worth is that much money? You don't seem to know anything for certain. Then you said that they're apparently soliciting donations. Well, are they or aren't they? You don't even know that. You seem to be trading in idle gossip, none of which affects you personally. Let's focus on the facts instead. A family has lost a son and a young child has lost his father. What possible business is it of yours to speculate on their finances at such a terrible time? If you don't like the possibly fictional trust fund, don't contribute to it." My God, you got it all exactly right, Kim.
I'm so proud.
Yeah. But imagine writing this to the New York Times.
Yeah.
It was anonymous, but still. There'll certainly be people who recognize the story, right? Who in the paper and may even guess who wrote the letter. Bravado and vulnerability. This is the great Patti LuPone here, and your sweater from goat to glory. A lot of interest in farm to table. This is farm to closet. I've not heard that term before. Maybe we've coined it here, Kim. Earth is so surly. Let's slip its bonds. There's that famous saying about that was used by Reagan. Reagan quoted the line when the Challenger disaster happened. Space is now big business, and mastering it is not a simple matter. It is rocket science, says Alex Williams. I see Michael Strahan is going to space. He's going to be the first journalist-ish person in space. There's been a long journey to get journalists into space, but Michael, who's a former football player and a star on sports shows and on Good Morning America, is more personality than anything, but he is going into space, or going in whatever this counts, 11 minutes into space. He's doing that. And here's the wedding section. We had one of the editors and writers of the section of the wedding section on the show as well, and great to see all of these happening. The weddings are back, which is so cool. All right, book review and the 10 best books of 2021. Of course, you believe, as we all do, that Kim's book is one of the 10 best. But Kim, what are your thoughts on the 10 best books? Or what did you read?
Well, I was embarrassed to look at the list, and I feel like I've done so much reading over the past year and a half and bought so many books in an effort to support authors in bookstores, and I had only read one, but I loved it. Patricia Lockwood's "No One Is Talking About This" was on there, and she is really just such a master of turning kind of internet speak into art. I really liked Priest Daddy, her memoir, and this novel is also quite exceptional. And then there was some books that I'm really looking forward to reading. I would love to read Andrea Eliot's Invisible Child. And I would also love to read the Plath biography. At the start of last year, I read the Adrienne Rich biography by Hilary Holiday, which was fascinating. And I think it would be interesting to read the Plath alongside that. And it's supposed to be wonderful.
Thank you. Amanda Gorman, looking much older than I think she actually is in this. Isn't she very young? And Amanda Gorman, whose new book is Call Us What We Carry, is her book. And I was corrected by Paula, who says Michael Strand's already been into space and back, I guess. While I was traveling, maybe that happened.
If you're looking for book recommendations, Amanda Gorman's recommendations in that piece of the authors that she likes are all really wonderful. She has amazing taste, as well as being a wonderful poet.
Thank you. And these are the top 10 books according to the New York Times. And How Beautiful We Were, Intimacies, The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois. No One Is Talking About This is the book that you mentioned. So there it is, one of the 10. And then When We Cease to Understand the World by Benjamin Labatut. And the nonfiction books, the Copenhagen Trilogy, How the Word is Passed, Invisible Child by Andrea Elliott. And Andrea is going to be on the show. A former student of mine is going to be on the show in the early spring. So I think it's in February. Neil will correct us. And on Juneteenth, Annette Gordon-Reed, and Red Comet, the Sylvia Plath book. So you had 3 out of 10. That's pretty amazing that you mentioned in the list. And more reviews here here's H.G. Wells foresaw the coming of aircraft, tanks, the sexual revolution, and the atomic bomb. The Young H.G. Wells, Changing the World by Claire Tomalin. And he was, of course, in your era that you were writing about, right? He was very active and popular.
Yeah, responding to a lot of the similar societal changes that were happening.
Thank you. And our team's pointing out, Andrea Elliott will be on our show in February. So exciting. Ms. Gorman is 23, which is very young. And Mr. Strahan has indeed flown into space and come back. So thank you, everybody, for that. We're going to keep moving here. We have about 20 minutes left with Kim. And folks, please jump in, share this video with your friends. We do this every Sunday, except the last 2 Sundays of the year. So we'll be back next week for one other episode. And we're going to have a lot of fun with Alan Katz. Will be joining us at 8:30 a.m. Sunday. And then we have a whole bunch of great speakers and guests in January as well. And we have more comments coming in. So I'm going to read a couple of comments before we continue. We want to thank everybody who's been writing in. Naomi says, a devastatingly brilliant memoir by literary giant Donald Antrim. One Friday in April, a story of suicide and survival. Wow, and there's also an unusual and important book, clearly. And Journalist-ish, is that a new TV series, asks Laura Silverman. All right, so now we're going to go into the New York Times Magazine has a cover on, this is the Great Performers cover. Every year they do, where they write about great Hollywood and other performances and performers, and the cover is different in different editions or different magazines. So I got this one, but there are 6 different covers. Let me see if I can show them to you. Oops, sorry. There we go. So there's Will Smith and others, Denzel and others on the cover. So I got the Benedict Cumberbatch cover. If I'd gotten the Will Smith cover, I would have taken it to my mom because she's a huge Will Smith fan. And let's see here. Any thoughts on the magazine, Kim? Are you a fan?
A huge fan, and I'm. It's a little bit too bad that that I wasn't doing this last week, because I thought that story, The Abortion That I Didn't Have, by Merritt Tierce, was so exceptional, and really relates to a lot of the things that the Girl Stunt reporters were talking about, in that, one of them did a huge expose on abortion practices in Chicago, and the debates then are sadly really the same as the debates that we're having now. The language, the positions, we haven't moved that far. But yeah, I just thought that was an exceptional piece of writing and an exceptional position to have. And I'm really happy that the magazine published it.
And your connection in terms of the way those women reporters covered abortion is also, that parallels very interesting, and people should check that out. Okay, so we're going to keep going here. Scare away. Some apps may prefer to see you terrified of your own community, and that's what the Citizen app is for. Are you familiar with that? Have you used it or seen it?
Some of my graduate students were saying that they used it. I think that I found it useful. I just feel like it would make me paranoid in ways that I didn't want to be paranoid. So I haven't used it. I don't know if other people have and have found it valuable.
I have it, and I will tell you that I find it just mostly a waste of time, and it just adds to your paranoia. Because especially when you live on the upper west side of Manhattan, there's so much going on, including false reporting, false stories. And then the other day, there was like an urgent alert that a man is stuck in an elevator in a building a couple blocks down. Like, what am I supposed to do? And people get stuck in elevator. I feel bad for the guy, but what am I supposed to do? And by the way, Citizen very conveniently sells you an app called Protect, a service that will help you. It's like a Uber for bodyguards. And you press a button and a bodyguard shows up within X number of minutes and will escort you to wherever you're going. Now, wouldn't it benefit them to have a lot of paranoia being increased, right? So they are the problem and the solution in that case. So one of the other things Citizen does is it announces whenever somebody is joined and tells you your friends have joined. So I take a screenshot and saying, look, this is how much they care about your privacy. They announce to me that you've joined. And by the way, it's a waste of your time. So that's my way of participating in that. The poem, Always Worth a Read, please check it out. And TV for Cats is a letter mining the internet's catalog of feline-friendly content. Are you a pet person?
I have 2 cats, and we do not show them their own television, though sometimes they watch with us.
Our dog refuses to acknowledge even television is real, so she's ahead of us. How to break in boots. This is apparently important if you wear cowboy boots because of the leather. And let's keep going. Can I skip jury duty because of COVID fears? Okay, so here's again, I'm putting you on the spot. The question is there, right there in the headline. Can I, Ms. Todd?
Skip jury duty because of COVID fears? Yes. I think that sometimes COVID fears would be highly legitimate. You could have unvaccinated children at home. You could be personally yourself very vulnerable. I think people skip jury duty to society's detriment for much worse reasons than that. So I'm going to say yes. Okay. I mean, if it's genuine, I don't know.
And this is the ethicist, which is different from the etiquette questions before. Janelle says, use Citizen app and TV news in Philly for tips mostly, but TV will use user-captured video now. Yeah, that's a big part of this. So we're just going to skip ahead, and here's Amanda Gorman's book, Inspire Change this holiday season with books by Amanda Gorman. So three books by Amanda Gorman. Good Lord, 23 years old and 3 books. And Ham and Pop, Christmas Means the Beatles on the Record Player, and Root Beer Glazed Ham for Eric Kim. And let's see here, great performers. And I know there's a really nice video, so we'll just take a look at that video online. And text by A.O. Scott. Kim Stewart, there's Will Smith, Ruth Nega. It's really nice, look at this. And Gabby Hoffman. And look at these photographs. Hidetoshi Nishijima, Denzel. Oh, that photograph, look at that. They're all wearing very bulky clothes, right? Joaquin Phoenix and Tessa Thompson. So these are great performances by great performers. Bo Burnham and Josephine Gabriel Sands. I don't know some of these people. I do know this person. Power of the Dog. Wow,
I just watched it. Yeah.
Bad Luck. Honor Swinton Byrne. Souvenir Part 2. It's really lovely. It's so well done. Why Hollywood Still Matters. So you got a sense of that, and this is the print version of that here. I've wanted to see King Richard, the movie about Serena and Venus Williams and their dad, starring Will Smith. The Metropolitan section, which you don't get in papers outside of New York. An old crime turns murkier. New twists in a 1993 case have raised questions about who really killed a woman in a Buffalo suburb. And wrestling team grapples with COVID regulations. So various aspects of our life are affected. We talked about real estate already. And one lot, two homeowners. Her art was abstract and her loft full of light. That sounds like an interesting way to describe Emily Mason. And the best of 2021 arts and leisure. We're just not going to have time to go through all of this, but must be full of great things that I missed this year. And here's an Inside Culture desk. What did you do this year? Starting with a few leading questions, we try to guess your 2021 cultural diet. So they have a whole bunch of questions here. And just the playfulness on which they're using all this, I think is great. Meg Stalter endured 2021 with her dog and Dolly. I don't know who that is. HBO Max's Hacks. And here's the best of theater. Did you get to watch any theater this year?
I watched some online, but I haven't, despite the urging of my playwright friends, I haven't ventured back into a theater. I'm just trying to minimize risk as much as I can, but I'm sorry, I really want theater to survive. But I'm just not quite ready. If
they're doing it online, that you're supporting them.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's no shame in that.
Yeah.
Here's dance, and then classical and dance, best of 2021. Openings and reawakenings, best of culture. So much to see and read and understand. And then here's an unusual thing in sports. Daniil Medvedev, who won the US Open, this year's finest and funniest performance art took place in Arthur Ashe Stadium when the lanky young Russian smacked his last serve, won the US Open title, and dumped his whole body onto the court, miming a PlayStation move as he lolled like a dead fish. As arrogant as it was ridiculous, Medvedev's side flop has stuck with me as a Gen Z masterclass in how to stay human in a world full of memes. If you must dive into the algorithm, do it with total contempt. Well written, Jason Farago. So that's nice. But I didn't even know that's what he was doing, right? Like, I'm so out of touch. I'm so old. The glory of the big screen, Manolo Dragis's reviews. Any movies you want to recommend? Your top 10, top 1, top 2?
Oh, wow. So many. I mean, just because it's top of mind, I did enjoy Power of the Dog. I'm a big fan of Jane Campion. I think for the first half, I was sort of wondering what was going on, but then she really pulls it together, and Cumberbatch is wonderful toward the end. So I don't know if that's the best of anything. It's the best that I saw last week. So how about that?
Okay, we'll take it.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm looking at this list. I don't think I've heard of, or I may have heard of some of these, but I've not seen a single one of these films. What's missing here? A movie we did venture into the theater to see for the very first time when we went into the theater after 2 years. The latest James Bond is worth watching. Lots of action and things for everybody, no matter how big or small a James Bond fan you are. There's so much to see there, and we loved it. So, recommend.
I would love to see the new Macbeth too on my to-do list. So.
It's very long, the James Bond, and here's The Power of the Dog, and more films that matter, and then best of television. And there's a Bo Burnham, who we saw is listed here. Succession, The Good Fight, Dickinson, The White Lotus, Station 11. It's a sin. There's too much content. Like, how are we supposed to get through all of this? I mean, we didn't even get to the music, Kim. Look at all this music. 2 pages of music in here, and then art. So there's too much going on. So with that, let's talk about let's kind of start wrapping it up here. We only have a few minutes left with you. So first, we just want to say to Kim Todd, thank you so much for being with us, for sharing so much of your journey, and your story and your fabulous new book. I want to show the book cover again, and also to read a little bit here, a vivid history that brings to light the girl stunt reporters who went undercover and into danger to expose the rot at the heart of the Gilded Age. Sensational, the hidden history of America's girl stunt reporters by Kim Todd. And what we're going to do is we're going to have Kim stand by for a minute as Neil and I go through some wrap up here. And we're going to come back and ask you two things, Kim. One is to tell us why everybody should go out and get this book and read it. And maybe also it's a great gift for the holiday season. And then second, I'm going to ask you for a pro tip, a writing tip for folks who are journalists, writers, what you have learned writing that you would share, a succinct tip of a minute or so. That would be very helpful for us to have. So with that, we're going to bring Neil back. And Neil, another great show.
Absolutely, Sri. Thank you very much. I mean, we started off, looking at all the content, not just about Kim and the book, but also, the best of series. We just, as you said, there was just too much great content to go through in the paper today. I mean, the lists, the best of theater, the best of movies, several best of book lists. Graphic novels and poetry and historical fiction. And on top of that, Puzzle Mania in the same issue. I mean, how, it's incredible. But, and to top it off, we got to hear about your time in Oslo. I mean, I was particularly, to see, I thought the highlight was you asking the question at the ceremony. But then to see your interview with the Prime Minister of Norway, I mean, it's kind of like, hold my beer. I've got a better one than that, and so proud to do that. I do want to take a moment as well. I don't have a graphic prepared for it, but I do want to give a shout out to my cousin Devin Parek, who was given a award from the Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Organization this week for his work. And just want to do a big shout out to Devin for that. He does such great work in general. He helped found the Parek Center at the New York Langone Hospital for the study of MS. So I just want to give a shout out to him, a little personal privilege there. There's Devin and all the great work that he does. But thank you, Sri. So what we'll do, we want to definitely thank our staff. We couldn't do this show without our great crack team, Paula Kiger, Steve Taylor, Julia Weeks, and Carla Baranakis. And speaking of Carla, she puts out the Local Connection every week. It's a great newsletter put out by the Center for Cooperative Media at Montclair State University. Each week, it offers story ideas and pro tips for journalists. And best of all, it's free. You can subscribe at bit.ly/local news tips. bit.ly/local news tips. We want to thank, of course, Muckrack, our sponsor for the New York Times Read Along, and remind everyone that the New York Times Read Along is produced by Digimentors, a social and digital consulting firm that Sri started several years ago, that I joined last year. In addition to social and digital consulting and amplification, we do conferences, summits, webinars, talk shows, trainings, and workshops. So if you're interested in having us produce a show like this for you, please get in touch, Sri at digimentors.group or Neil at digimentors.group. And again, Sri, thank you so much for all that you've done, not just to build up the New York Times Read Along community, but also the work with Digimentors. It's been an absolute thrill to work with you over the last year and a half.
I should say that this is my last episode of the year, since I won't be here next year. We're going to do a plug for next week's guest. But to think of where the Read Along has come, 6 years of the Read Along, where I was just reading it on Facebook, and then you came along and helped elevate it. And then Paula and Carla and Steve and Julia, and now it's become its own thing. It's so wonderful. and I learned so much from this, and just the community. And I'm so grateful to everyone. And folks, as you all know someone in your life who not would just benefit from the read along, and I hope you'll tell them about it, but also tell them about our company, Digimentors. We do the social media consulting, digital consulting. So all of you know someone who could use our help. We do hybrid events, and we've done funerals, weddings, memorial services. Our first bris we did this week. It was very moving to be part of such a intimate, sacred, moving, important ceremony, and to be part of that ancient ceremony. It was very, very, very touching for us to be a part of that, and Neil got to work on it. So I just want to say, if you know someone who needs some social media help or digital, please let us know. We'll send you our brochure, and we gladly take meetings with anybody. And no project is too big or too small for us, and so we'd love to talk to you. And I'm saying my thank yous now because I won't be here next week, because next week is our episode with Alan Katz, who will be here. Alan is the author of 50 plus highly acclaimed books for young readers, and he's a great speaker, very funny guy. He used to warm up the crowd at the old Rosie O'Donnell show, and is a co-author with the Today Show's Dylan Dreyer of Misty the Cloud, an October 2021 New York Times bestseller. And he also helped name our show She's on Call, which comes up at 11 a.m. Eastern in just an hour. Dr. Sujana Chandrasekhar and Dr. Marina Kurian will be interviewing experts on cardiac health and millennial wellness. Please check it out. It's also available as a podcast on all platforms. So look for She's on Call. And Neil, I will be heading out next week, as you know, to travel to Dubai and to India to celebrate my wife's Rupa's birthday, to meet my family, meet my parents. All depends on Omicron if we will actually go. I saw a wonderful tweet that said, I wanted to learn the Greek alphabet, but not like this. And the cases are up all over the world, and it's worrisome. So I'm kind of playing it by ear whether we'll actually go. We'll find out in a couple of days. And our flight back, Neil, is via Japan, and Japan has put India on the red list. So as of now, we don't have a way back home yet. So I might be doing this, in January. We might still be in India. Who knows? But hopefully that will not be the case. We want to come back. The kids need to go back to college. But thank you, Neil. Thank you to our amazing team for pulling all this together. And working with all of you is a real life highlight also. So thank you, everybody. And please, everyone, check out my Twitter thread on everything I saw in Norway and the Nobel Peace Prize. It's pinned to the top of my Twitter feed. And with that, let's bring back Kim. Kim Todd, you've been very patient again. Thank you for hanging out backstage so well and elegantly for us. And we want to ask you two things. One, tell us about your book again and why everybody should get it. And then we'll ask you for a pro tip. Jonathan says, great show. My favorite woman journalist writer may be Isabella Bird, who, if she didn't exist, would have had to been invented. Thank you. And maybe you know Isabella's work. And Rose says, Sensational sounds like a terrific book. And Rose Horowitz, who is my partner in crime in the COVID show, the global COVID show, is married to Alan Katz, who's been a guest on that show twice. And Ron Thomas, better late than never, checking in from Verona, New Jersey. So he's here. He's normally watching from Dubai. Ron, I'm going to Dubai. I'm going to miss you, but we'll connect maybe here in New York. Diana says, great guest. I learned a lot. Kim is so relatable. Thanks for another amazing show. And by the way, Kim, Diana's watching in the West Coast. So she's, if you were impressive at 6 a.m., imagine you like later in the day. I'm sure for her, she'd be even more impressed. Miriam, thanks for this show. It's always rewarding to watch. Thank you, everybody, for being part of this. Ellen says, wonderful show. Thanks all, and safe travels, Sri and family. Over to you, Kim.
Yeah, so Sensational, A Hidden History of America's Girl Stunt Reporters, is the history of overlooked women who are doing investigative reporting during the Gilded Age, and the way it reflects our continued undervaluing of women's writing. And I really wrote it in particular for young women interested in journalism and nonfiction writing. So if you have one in your life, it might be a good present for them. In terms of my writing advice, I think it would just be to honor your curiosity and see where it takes you, and don't be dismissive that your interests might be like too weird or too obscure, but really follow up on the questions that plague you, and you probably will produce something of great value to everyone.
Thank you, Kim. Really appreciate that, and we loved having you on the show. The book, of course, Sensational. We want to put that back up on the screen for folks. The Hidden History of America's Girl Stunt Reporters. And I certainly want to encourage folks to check out all the background information that we shared about the show, particularly that video from Jezebel had some really great pieces. But we're able to walk through so much of it on the show today. So Kim, thank you so much for taking the time with us. Want to encourage people at 11 o'clock to join She's on Call again at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Dr. Sujana Chandrasekhar and Dr. Marina Kurian will be hosting that show. And we have a great team. Rose Horowitz, Vandana Menon, Julia Weeks, and Sri helped produce that show. So with that, thank you, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.